Okay, welcome to another episode of Thoughts and Bolts. I'm your host, Pedro Laveria, and we're back on to the OSAP leak. If you are not familiar with these documents or their origin, please watch episode one of this series. If you're still with me, I'm assuming you already have. So let's get into it. Today, I want to focus on the data set that comes from what's called the Full Utah Ranch Database. Now, from what I can tell reading this report, the difference between the full Utah Ranch database and the Utah Ranch only is that the full Utah Ranch database goes beyond Skinwalker Ranch and into the Uinta Basin at large, right? So it includes what's happening on the highway. It includes what's happening in towns like Vernal, Utah. And so you just have more data, and more data is better, right? It lets you find better quality patterns. Okay. And if you look at the difference between the full Utah Ranch database and the Utah Ranch data only, um, you get the same basic patterns, okay, but you get them in better detail. Now, I want to draw your attention once again to humanoid. If you read the report, humanoid is described as humanoid and not human because the humanoids, according to the witnesses, are 8 feet tall. Okay. Um, and then again, you get this, wolf, which again, according to the witnesses, is much larger than a normal wolf. For the purposes of this video, we'll say dire wolf because we're talking about really big, anomalous, bulletproof wolves. As crazy as that sounds, there's dog-like, hyena-like, and of course, the bipedal dog-like. Okay. For lack of a better word, werewolf, right? Bipedal wolf. Now, I'm going to, again, go into why I don't think this is so crazy, even though it's very strange. Um, but again, I want to draw your attention to humanoid, right? Humanoid is the only phenotype, if you will, the only appearance of these entities, which happens in association with a UAP sighting. Okay, the only other one, of course, is ET. Now, again, these terms are not precise. They're based on what the witness said. And you don't expect multiple witnesses um, from, multiple experiences to use language always in the same exact precise way, right? So when you look at this data and you see there's ET, one sighting, and then gray, another sighting, one wonders, is there overlap between the two? Are these being parsed unnecessarily, or are they simply being parsed based on the terminology the witness said, right? You also have, you know, Sasquatch, okay, reddish brownish animal, light colored animal, okay, invisible creature, shadow being, whatever you want to call it. But if you look, ET and humanoid are the only ones that happen in association with a UAP sighting, okay, unidentified aerial phenomenon. Um, in the case of the humanoid, those are the only cases in which the UAP made a noise. And in the case of the humanoid, those are the only entities that are associated with some kind of portal. Okay. So that's all very interesting, right? Why is it that the humanoid is and the ET are the only ones associated with a UFO, and the humanoid is the only one associated with a portal? And then again, you look at the zoomorphic sightings, right? Where you're talking about Sasquatch, red animal, light colored animal, dog-like, hyena-like, wolf, bipedal, dog. These are happening at larger frequency than the humanoid and the ET and the alien, or at least at the same rate frequency, right? You have what? 9, 10, 11. If you put the humanoid, the ET, and the gray into one bucket, right? You have 11 of those. And then if you look at the zoomorphic entities, you have what? 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay. So the zoomorphic um, appearance is happening more often than the humanoid, the ET, the gray. Well, the reason that's interesting is because if you look at the free study, okay, by the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation, right? This was a study done by Ray Hernandez, Dr. John Climo, who's a professor of psychology, and Dr. Rudy Shield, who was a physics professor at Harvard, I believe, or astrophysics professor. Um, this study used more than 4,000 experiencers, okay? More than 4,000 close encounter people part of this study. And if you look at that study, the most common non-human intelligence encountered was an energy being. The second most common was the human, followed by the gray. However, that's not what you get at Skinwalker Ranch or in the Uinta Basin. The most common non-human intelligence entity encountered was some type of zoomorphic appearance, right? Whether that be the bipedal wolf, the giant wolf, dog-like, Sasquatch. Um, that was the most common, whereas with the 4,000 experiencers, the zoomorphic beings were the least common. So that's interesting, isn't it? You'll also notice that um, with regards to the nature of the experience, in the free study, positive and neutral experiences far outweigh um, the negative experiences, right? Negative experiences are described by these close encounter experiencers, these UFO contactees, but they are dwarfed by the combination of positive and neutral experience. Okay. However, if you go to the OSAP data, and once again, this is a Pentagon UFO program with a $22 million budget. The most common human reaction, as you can see at your lower left-hand side, is fear. Okay, fear is the most common human reaction. Now, there are people, as you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, um, there are experiences of people feeling elation, comfort, and relief, curiosity. One person said it was cool, quote unquote. One person said it was life-changing. Okay. But going back to that lower left-hand side of the screen, fear is the most common human reaction. Okay. Fear is not a positive experience. Um, but again, positive experiences and neutral experiences far outweigh the negative experiences with the 4,000 experiencers in the free study. So that's also interesting. It should be noted. The other thing that I find very interesting is that when you look at the kind of UAP from the full Utah Ranch database, the most common by far is light, and the second most common is round. Now, the report does say that there is almost certainly some overlap between light and round. This is again based on the terminology used by the witnesses, so it's not going to be precise. But you'll notice that there are a plethora of UAP shapes, okay, in this report. Some people saw something shaped like a dumbbell. One person saw something shaped like a cigar, okay. You had something shaped like a train boxcar, something shaped like a Mexican hat, something shaped like a 6-point star, something shaped like a fish, okay. Um, something, oh, three people saw ovals, six different people apparently saw triangles. Okay. But the most common is light, and the second most common is round. And this is interesting when you look at data for the entire nation of Brazil, which was collected by the Brazilian Air Force in this report that at one time was secret, but now has been released by the Brazilian government. This report was done using data spanning 50 years, okay, from the late 1940s all the way up till the year 2000. And as you can see, the two most common UFO shapes or appearances are a light, which is what luz means, and circular, circular. Okay. So circular and light are the two most common UFO appearances in the nation of Brazil, according to the Brazilian Air Force. And again, this is spanning a 50-year period. But you'll also notice that there are a bunch of different shapes, right? There's this other format bucket here, but again, we have triangular, rectangular, quadratic, we have ovals, we have stars, okay, we have hats, okay? All these other myriad shapes are accounted for in the Brazilian data as well, but the two most common are light and circular. And again, that tracks with the OSAP data for the Uinta Basin um, for the times in which, it was studied. Okay, light and round are the two most common by far. However, there are myriad of other shapes recorded. What I find interesting is that in the free study, the most common kind of entity encountered was an energy being, but that is not mentioned anywhere in the OSAP data. Now, I think there's two possibilities. One is that there are no energy beings visiting the Uinta Basin, or there are, but they're simply being misidentified. Okay, I go back to this. What if these so-called lights are the energy beings? I'm not saying they are, but it's a possibility. If the lights are the energy beings, that would mean that they are keeping some sort of distance that they're not keeping in the case with these other people in the free study. The other thing that again, I think is interesting is that in the free study, the zoomorphic entities, the zoomorphic beings, are the least common. However, in OSAP study for the Uinta Basin, they're the most common. And again, I think that all shows should be looked at within the context of the fact that the OSAP experiences recorded are overwhelmingly negative, whereas in the free study, the experiences are a combination of positive and neutral. Those are the most common, okay, with the negative being represented, being significant, but not the majority, not by any stretch. So I think that's interesting as well. Now, again, I promised you at the beginning I was going to explain why this isn't so crazy. Well, look, um, if parapsychology has shown us anything, it's that telepathy is real. So I know on UFO Twitter, people are in love with the telepathy tapes. Now, here's my question. What is telepathy? What is telepathy? Okay, we often frame it as communicating with your mind. Okay. Right now, I'm communicating to you with my voice, with my, throat and mouth. I'm making sounds, right? These sounds are, representations of my thoughts. Okay, they're symbols. Um, but what is telepathy? What if a better way of describing telepathy is not communicating with your mind, but rather sharing thoughts, right? If you can read my thoughts and I can read your thoughts, we're sharing thoughts. Okay. So sharing thoughts is a thing. Two people telepathically sharing thoughts is a thing. Well, if two people telepathically sharing thoughts is possible, then shared hallucinations are possible as well, right? People hallucinate. When people are in an aberrated mental state because of, very high stress or malnutrition or you name it, um, sometimes they hallucinate. They see things that aren't there. And what if it's possible that two people, through some kind of telepathic mechanism, can share a hallucination? Okay. Bipedal wolf, bipedal dog, that sounds a lot like the werewolf mythology that we grew up on watching scary movies. Okay. Sasquatch, lots of Sasquatch, Bigfoot lore in American culture. Dire wolves. Okay. Dire wolves existed in North America in prehistoric times, as did Gigantopithecus. And so I wonder if what's happening is that these people, um, the ranch personnel, the security, um, the scientists working on this program, what if they were having shared hallucinations and that these hallucinations were shared through some kind of telepathic mechanism? And what if um, frequency of these kinds of events is what's drawing in the non-human intelligence associated with the UFO phenomenon? Okay. Drawing in for what purpose? Well, if you watch my previous videos, to draw our attention to it, not the UFO phenomenon per se, but this phenomenon of the telepathically mediated shared hallucination. Okay. Again, this is just data. Okay. It's not evidence of anything unless you have a theory. So my theory, going back to episode one of this series, is that the activity on Skinwalker Ranch has two sources: a human telepathic, parapsychological source, and a non-human intelligence source associated with the UFO phenomena. In that the non-human intelligence, the UFO source, the alien source of the strange phenomena is being drawn in, is attracted to the human source, the human parapsychological, phenom the human parapsychology phenomenal source of the strange occurrences. Okay. So that's my theory. And again, why would they be drawn in? One, perhaps they're interested, but two, I think more than anything, it would be to draw our attention to what the human beings are doing, perhaps wittingly in the case of a Navajo shaman, or unwittingly in the case of OSAP personnel. I don't know. It's just a theory. Tell me what you think. Again, there's no such thing as a bipedal dog. We know this. There's no such thing as a werewolf. Uh, Bigfoot, Gigantopithecus went extinct, in prehistoric times. Human beings probably killed them all. Same thing goes for the dire wolf. Okay. And yet, people are seeing them. Uh, and they're seeing them in groups, right? People in groups are seeing them together. Okay. So I wonder, is this once again a telepathically mediated shared hallucination? Are these people sharing hallucinations the way an autistic child and his mother will share thoughts, according to telepathy tapes, right? And is this some kind of reverse clairvoyance? Rather than seeing the future, they're seeing the past. Is that a possibility, right? Are they seeing the dire wolves that once were, right? The different kinds of mammals that once were in North America. Are they seeing them right now? Even though nobody else would see them, right? You know, if we were there. Okay. So that's my question. Um, I think this is the way we need to approach this more and more is again without a materialist metaphysics, um, with an understanding that consciousness and understanding consciousness and studying consciousness is just as important as studying physics and chemistry and biology. Okay. Thoughts and bolts. Thoughts and bolts. That's what this show is all about. So that's my theory. I think, again, there's two sources for the stuff happening at Skinwalker Ranch and in the Uinta Basin. One is a non-human intelligence associated with the UFO phenomenon, and the other is a very human source, okay, which is human, you know, parapsychological ability, human telepathy, clairvoyance, telekinesis, you name it, albeit perhaps uncontrolled or controlled, depending on whether to what degree you put stock into the Ute and Navajo explanation of what's happening at Skinwalker Ranch. And as I've outlined in the first video of the series, I think we should put more stock into it. And I think again, bipedal wolves, that's pretty scary, right? Tall creatures, hyenas, giant wolves. It's all very scary. And again, that tracks with fear reaction, right? So what if this is some kind of, feedback loop, right? Where fear states create scary hallucinations, which create more fear states and more unpleasant hallucinations, right? Um, Bipedal, dog and these kind of creatures were associated with very strong smells, very strong, unpleasant smells. And so I wonder if that's all tied into the negative, mental states of the people experiencing, again, the telepathically mediated shared hallucination. Okay. And not to repeat myself, but sometimes you have to. I wonder if this phenomenon is what's drawing in non-human intelligence associated with the UFO phenomenon because the NHI are trying to draw our attention to this. Okay. Because it does signal um, the possibility that our side is potentially just as strong as theirs. And maybe they want us to understand that because of its metaphysical implications, which I outlined in my last video, which I always go back to, right? I love it. So that's it for today. As I always say, look inward more than you look outward, more than you look upward, and you'll have a better understanding of the UFO phenomenon, and you'll probably be a lot happier too. So, with that, good night.